recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm going to ask each member to introduce themselves, starting with me. I'm Al Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield and today's Chair.
Peter Price, Member for Shire Green Brightside.
Councillor Ibulla, Netheridge and Sharrow.
Good afternoon. Councillor Mike Chaplin for Southey Ward.
Laura Moynihan, Councillor for Manor Castle.
Good afternoon all. Councillor Gary Weatherall for Shire Green and Brightside Ward.
Councillor Henry Nottage for Hillsborough Ward.
Councillor Glynis Chapman for Mosborough Ward and also co-chair of the Planning Committee.
Roger Davison, Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Cliff Woodcraft, Councillor for Fulwood Ward.
Thank you. Joanne, do I have any apologies?
We had apologies from Bernard Little and Tony Downing.
Henry's here for... You're here for...
Yeah, I'm substituting for Bernard Little.
Cliff?
Just to say, as I wasn't here for the last meeting, I'll be opting out of the first item.
I don't think there's any exclusions for press or public, no? No. Declaration of interest. Anyone have any? Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Item 7B, planning application for Dore Nursery. The Peak District National Park Authority have put in an objection to this application, and as I'm Sheffield City Council's member on the Peak District National Park Authority, I'm going to not take part or vote in this debate as it could be perceived as prejudicial. I should add that I've not had any part in putting together the objections, nor have I put any in of my own. Thank you.
Roger?
Yes, it's 7C. Comes within my ward. I haven't actually said anything or made any opinion to any outside body, but I would like to draw your attention to page 101, where it says here, under Councillor Shafak Mohammed, who is the one that has actually made an objection, the councillors add that the land adds, well, that should be council law, not councillors.
Thanks, Roger. Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. It's the same as Councillor Davidson. It's application 7C is in my ward, but I have not sort of taken any action either way on it, and I'll decide today. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Can we go to the minutes of the previous meeting, please? That starts at page 9. Yep. 10. 11. 12. 13. Thank you. site visits will be put into members' diaries as required. Thank you. And today we've got 4 applications to hear. Of the various applications. I'll start with item 7A, which is planning application number 2300777, stroke full within the Curtilage of KFC 236, Queen Road, Highfield, Sheffield. Over to you, Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair. First thing to say is this has already been alluded to, that this is an item that was deferred from the previous meeting, and it was deferred to allow for a site visit by members and to allow further consideration of the location of the bin store area adjacent to the River Sheaf Walk and vehicular access. So since that meeting, the visit has taken place, and we've also had, officers have had further discussions with the applicant about potential amendments to the layout. And I'll just briefly, if Jay wouldn't mind just going through the slides as I'm speaking, and just keep flicking through them, please, Jay. And when we get to the layout, I will explain what the changes are. Oh, sorry, you've only got one screen, members, haven't you, to see. So, in that case, the layout, which shows the changes that have been taken place, is on slide 21. So it's the first of the plans that comes up on the screen. And if members recall, the bin store was located on the sort of northwestern or western corner of the layout. We'll get there in a moment. But I think all members have got the slides in front of them in paper form. So it's on page 21, and it's in the left-hand corner, effectively, of the site there. That was where the bin store was, in a timber housing. There was concern about the relationship of that with the as yet unadopted River Sheaf Walk, which is immediately adjacent, and the river is beyond. There was also, before I go any further, a query raised at the last meeting as to the extent of that use of the bin store. Was it just for the proposed Dunkin' Donuts unit, or was it also for the KFC unit? And it's been confirmed that the bin store is intended to serve the whole site. The upshot of the discussions has been to relocate the bin store onto the Queen's Road frontage, but to improve its appearance as well. So it will be in it will have a brick housing, and it will have a green, not a green wall as such, but it will have a greened wall facing Queen's Road in the form of climbing plants, amongst the other vegetation that's been proposed on the Queen's Road frontage. Where the bin store was is now replaced, as you can see, with some benches for seating adjacent to the River Sheaf Walk, and some cycle parking and landscaping where the remaining space allows. The consequence of this is an improved relationship to the river. It does result in the loss of 2 car parking spaces where the bin store is now located, but our view is that is not a significant loss, and doesn't have an impact on parking availability or highway safety, or to the detriment of highway safety. And so we feel this is an acceptable solution that we're happy to now recommend to members, and they're essentially the changes that have taken place to the layout. If you then turn to page 23, or slide 23, you can see that there was a concern raised at the meeting about the ability of vehicles to enter and exit at the same time through what is quite a narrow entrance. And this tracking layout demonstrates that can and does work. Larger vehicles may well result in some queuing either within the site or on Charlotte Road, but again, highways officers aren't concerned about that in a highway safety sense, and don't anticipate that being a frequent occurrence. Other than that, the scheme hasn't changed from the previous meeting, Chair. So what I will just do is refer members to item 3 on the supplementary report. You'll see there that there's an additional representation from the Chief and Porter Trust, who were present at the last meeting and made representations verbally. To a degree, commenting on the deferral and seeing and identifying that was an opportunity to improve the layout and the commitments to the river. Their response followed consultation with the River Stewardship Company and their own river rangers about the issues they face in maintaining the river. And, sorry, there's a typo there, drew conclusions which led to the following requests. So there were those 3 requests made there for further enhancements to the stewardship and maintenance of the river by providing a lockable gate and a protected steel ladder down to the river, extending mesh panels along the railings to minimise litter blown from the site, and to install historical and waymarking signage. We discussed these with the applicant, and what came from that was the mesh panels will be provided, and there will be there's an additional condition, Chair, recommended, which would provide a waste litter strategy for the site that will include litter picking across the site, and that's all with the intention of minimising the amount of litter that might blow from the site into the river, which is a long-term maintenance problem for the people involved. There was also a reference within the representation to policy G13 that was also discussed in representations and in discussions at the last meeting. So we've set out here what G17 says, and conclude that we feel the proposals don't conflict with the aims or requirements of that policy. The aims of the policy are to protect and enhance, for the benefit of wildlife, the green network which the river forms part of, and where appropriate for public access and recreation. And then the bullet points there, the A to D, set out how that would be achieved. And as we say in the penultimate paragraph there, parts A and B aren't relevant to the proposal because it's not the kind of work that is being described there. And with regard to C, the development is set back from the riverbank wall and has allowed for landscaping, and the footpath has actually already been created, so a lot of the policy doesn't necessarily apply. We feel the applicant's commitments to the mesh panels and the litter strategy are proportionate to what's been proposed here on a site that's already been developed, and this is a relatively small addition to it. So that's the supplementary information, Chair, and the recommendation remains to grant conditionally.
Thanks, Chris. Barbara?
Yeah, there are 2 issues that came up from our site visit yesterday. Well, first of all, it's page 36. I understand that there isn't sort of a subsystem, and that's being discussed at the moment, so presumably nothing can take place until that's actually been agreed. Is that correct?
The details of the drainage, sorry, I was fiddling with papers to some extent there. The details of the drainage scheme haven't been agreed, but there is a condition imposed to secure a sustainable drainage scheme within the papers.
Right. And the second thing is, it was the question about security of where the seating was going to be, because apparently sort of someone complained it might be in a sort of a blind spot. Is it possible to actually have security lighting added as part of a condition, or some sort of surveillance of that site?
Chair, we haven't a condition listed, but I do think that is a reasonable suggestion that a lighting strategy, including security for areas such as that within the site, would be an appropriate addition if members supported the suggestion.
Members, Mr. Shower? Yeah? Yeah, agree.
Chair, just for record, it just needs to be proposed second and then voted on, just to be add the condition. Thank you.
Henry, second. All in favour? Agreed, thank you.
And can I just throw a point? I think we missed it first time round, but on page 23, it's about when waste can be collected. And I hadn't noticed before that sort of it was the same times on Sundays and bank holidays as weekdays. Page 23, item 25. It's only, sorry, it's the late finish till 11 o'clock on Sundays and bank holidays. Only sort of it's, so is that something that can't be discussed now? That is actually as it stands.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure I fully understood the question. So the condition 25 is identifying when waste removal, sorting, etc. should take place. And sorry, Chair, I think we were saying it finishes the same time on Mondays to Saturdays and on Sundays and bank holidays. The difference in the condition, the greater care, if you like, that's given to Sundays and bank holidays is not starting until 9 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you. We have no speakers on this. Anyone else got any questions then? Comment, Peter.
Just to congratulate the officers, Chair, I think now we've protected that River Sheaf walk, I think it's brilliant. And I know it doesn't go a long way down, but it's setting the pattern for future, and hopefully one day it'll become a cycle route. So I really think they've proved the value of this committee actually by knocking it back and having another look at it. I think you've come back with a much better project, and I think it's a benefit to particularly to the people who love that riverside walk and not to sit there as well. So well done, everybody.
Do we have anybody else? No? So, can we take a vote, please? Peter?
4, Chair.
Evie?
4, Chair.
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 That's passed, thank you very much. The next item is planning application number 22/04338/full Dore Nursery, Brickhouse Lane, Sheffield. Again, is it Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Are you able to move to the first slide, please? Thank you. So this is the red line boundary which shows the location of the site. It's located to the south of the junction of Hathersage Road and Brickhouse Lane. Next slide, please. This slide shows the aerial view of the site. To the east you can make out the residential properties and they form the sort of urban edge of Dore. The site is located in the green belt, and the boundary of the green belt runs along the edge of those properties to the east that I've just pointed out. The site is also located within an area of high landscape value and it's within 1 kilometre of the Peak District National Park. The site is formed of 3 distinct parcels of land. So to the east you can make out there's a field, and that's an undeveloped field. The central portion of the site is a garden centre. It comprises a series of buildings. There's a brick-built building and various associated structures, including greenhouses, polytunnels, sheds and storage areas. They're all of a very low form, and there's a tree plantation to the west of the site there. Next slide, please. I've just run through some images of the site. So the first image on the left-hand side, which hopefully you can make out, if not you can have a look in your handout, might be clearer in there, is a view of the site from Brickhouse Lane. So it's looking towards Hathersidge Road with the Dore Inn located at the top of the road, and the site runs along the left-hand side of the image. You can see from that image that it's a fairly low-lying and rural area with limited development in that direction. The next image to the right-hand side of the screen is a view of the garden centre from within the car park area. Next slide, please. So these are two more views of the garden centre from the car park area, just showing sort of the low form of the buildings at present and how they sort of nestle quite comfortably within the landscape. Next slide, please. Another view taken of the front of the garden centre, so you can make out the trees, including on the right-hand side there's the plantation which I referred to from the aerial view, and sort of the glazed roofs of greenhouse structures. So again, fairly lightweight and low-lying structures. Next slide, please. This is a view from Hathersidge Road, looking back towards the site. So the trees that you can make out there form part of the site, and they are the plantation, which is located within the western portion of the site. Again, you can see how the site links to sort of open fields and there's the general rural feel of the area there. Next slide, please. This is a view looking in the other direction, so up Hathersidge Road with the site on the left-hand side. The trees to the left of the image are the trees within the curtilage of the site, which form part of the plantation. Next slide, please. And this is another view, but with a bit of a wider range, looking back towards the site with the plantation visible and Dore Inn. You can see that on the left-hand side of the image there. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed site layout. The application is a hybrid application for a 125 unit integrated retirement community to provide extra care housing. The scheme proposes individual apartments of 1 and 2 beds, which are for private occupation, and there's a high quality shared communal facilities and access to tailored support and care within the facility as well. There is a shortage of this type of accommodation within the city. So the application is hybrid, as alluded to before. So part of it seeks full planning permission and part of it seeks outline planning permission. It's hard to make out from that image, but the eastern portion of the site, there is actually a dotted line which runs just to the left of the main route into the site along the access road, so you might be able to see that better in your image in your pack. But the eastern portion of the site is where full planning permission is sought for 63 units. That includes a village centre building, which is the large building located fairly centrally within that eastern portion. That's a 3 to 4 story building, which comprises the communal areas on the ground floor and residential accommodation above, and it's also got parking at basement level. There's then 3 apartment blocks which are 3 stories high each, and then a number of smaller bungalow and dwellings around the perimeters of the site, sort of to the east and the southeast of the site. The remainder of the site, so the western portion, is the outline element. So whilst further details of sort of scale, layout, appearance are would be reserved for future approval, this layout does show an indicative layout of how those units would be arranged, and they appear to be formed of a similar layout and form to the full part of the application. Next slide, please. This is a CGI showing a view from the site entrance. So that building directly in front is block B2, which is directly in front of the site access, and it's a 3-storey building. Next slide, please. This shows some images of the smaller buildings around the periphery of the site. So they're 2-storey dwellings there. Next slide, please. And that's just a more detailed image of one of the dwellings which would be located around the periphery of the site. And this shows the village centre, so viewed from the front where it's 3 stories high, but at the back it's 4 stories high. Next slide, please, thank you. So these are the elevations of the village centre building, which, as I've mentioned, is 3 stories at the front and 4 stories at the back. This is the largest building on the site. It's got a footprint of approximately 70 metres by 20 metres and a height measured from the rear at the 4-storey extent of approximately 16.5 metres. The scale is significantly greater than the established urban grain of the surrounding area, where residential properties are generally 2-storey dwellings. The proposal is built predominantly from buff brick and reconstituted stone. Next slide, please. This is a view of the rear of the site, so this is where it's 4 stories. And again, it just shows you the sort of scale and massing of that block. Next slide, please. This is the ground floor layout. This is where the communal accommodation is proposed, and that comprises a cafe, restaurant area, a gym, pool, hairdressers, and some treatment rooms, and that's for use by the residents of the retirement village, and also by the cafes for use by others as well, so people from the wider area. Next slide. This is the first floor of the village centre building, and it's got a mix of 1 and bed 2 apartments, and all apartments would meet space standards, providing fairly roomy accommodation. Next slide, please. This is the second floor, so again, just shows the layout of the accommodation, which is 1 and 2 bed apartments. Next slide, please. And this is the basement area, which shows the undercroft parking. Next slide, please. This is one of the 3-storey apartment buildings. I think that's one's block B1. In terms of appearance, it's got a similar form and materiality to the village centre building, being constructed from buff brick and reconstituted stone. This is a floor plan of that block, showing 2-bed apartments. Again, all accommodation meets space standards. Next slide, please. That's another layout showing the apartments in the blocks. And next slide, please. And again, just another one of the apartment blocks. Next slide, please. This is the elevations of one of the bungalows. This is a 2-bed property. And again, the accommodation meets space standards. And next slide. And then one of the remaining dwellings, which I think is a 3-bed dwelling. If we can just go back to slide 36, please, which is the site layout, then I'll talk around the key issues. Yeah, that's it, thank you. It might be worth bringing that up in your pack so you can see it in perhaps a bit more detail. So overall, there have been 262 objections to the scheme and 357 letters of support. In terms of the principle of development, the site is located within the green belt. New buildings within the green belt are classed as inappropriate development unless they meet a number of exceptions as set out in the MPPF. One of the exceptions is the redevelopment of previously developed land, and there's a clause in there that states that that is an exception provided that it doesn't result in a harm to the openness of the green belt over and above the existing position. As I showed earlier on the aerial photograph, a large amount of the site is not classed as previously developed land, so part of it is a field and part of it is a tree plantation, which would not fall within the definition of previously developed land. The garden centre does comprise some previously developed land, although because of the use of that, some of it is classed as horticulture, which falls outside the definition of previously developed land. Considering the impact on the openness of the green belt, the proposal, owing to its dense urban form, the scale of the buildings in terms of their large footprints and height, the density of the proposal and the use, which would be more intense than the existing use, resulting in increased activity and lighting, etc. It's considered that it would have a much greater impact on the openness of the green belt than the existing garden centre building does. The proposal is also considered to be harmful to the purposes of including land within the green belt, which include checking the unrestricted sprawl of the built-up area and protecting the countryside from encroachment. So officers consider that the development represents inappropriate development within the green belt, and the MPPF sets out that such inappropriate development should be refused unless there are very special circumstances which exist to justify its approval. And I'll move on to very special circumstances towards the end when we discuss the planning balance of the scheme. In terms of design, the scheme, as shown before, is of quite a large scale in terms of its height and footprint, and it's significantly greater than the scale of the adjacent urban area of Dore. But obviously this is seen within the context of a more rural countryside area, where development is very low level and sparse. The site is considered to have an adverse impact on the area of high landscape value, and would detract from the rural countryside character of that area of high landscape value. It would also impact on the setting of the Peak District National Park, where views of the site are evident from within the Peak District National Park from a number of vantage points, including highways and public footpaths. So essentially the proposal is considered to erode the countryside and rural character of the site, creating a dense form of development. In terms of amenity, the space standards created internally would be acceptable, and there are a range of communal facilities which would be of benefit to residents. However, the proposal is a dense form of development, and I think that's demonstrated by the proximity of the proposal to the site boundaries. So if you could just go back to slide 36, please. Thank you. So you can see how the development is pushed right up to the site boundaries, particularly the bungalows at the outer edges, with only approximately 1 to 2 metres maximum between the rear elevations of those buildings and the site boundaries, which are the retained trees. That would create a poor relationship from those rear windows because there'd be poor light and outlook, and it would also potentially put pressure on the retention of those trees in the future. It's considered overall that given the concerns about amenity plus sort of the concerns about the scale of the proposal, that this scheme represents overdevelopment of the site. In terms of highways, the existing access is to be retained. A number of objections do raise concerns about junction safety and highway safety, but highways officers are generally satisfied with the arrangement as proposed, and movements to and from the site will not be significantly greater than the existing garden centre building. In terms of sustainability, it's approximately a 900-metre walk to the nearest shops within Dore. It's not ideal, and it's at the upper ends of the limits of distances that we would like to see between sort of walking distances. However, given the facilities that are provided within the development, which will be easily accessible to residents, and a number of measures which are proposed as part of the application, which include mobility scooter parks and private electric vehicle hire, the sustainability position is not considered to be a reason for a refusal, although it is a negative aspect of the scheme. A tree survey has been conducted as part of the application. There are a number of category B trees within the site. I think a relatively low number, I think there was 8 in total, which are along the site frontage and are to be retained. The majority of the trees within the site are category B trees. The plantation to the west of the site is to be removed, but replacement trees are proposed along that boundary to screen the development, and then the majority of the green that you can see around the periphery of the site is retained trees. In terms of biodiversity, there aren't any protected species on the site. The initial net gain calculation indicated that there would be a net loss of biodiversity. However, an amended study has been submitted which demonstrates that there would actually be a net gain through some sort of tweaks to the scheme, which include a few ponds to be created and some more trees to be planted. Officers weren't convinced about the amended calculation and whether the gain would be as significant as indicated in that study. However, we haven't interrogated that further, given that the principle of the development is considered to be unacceptable. However, it is considered that a net gain could be secured either on site, or if that's not possible, then it could be secured through an off-site contribution. There's no affordable housing proposed as part of the scheme, even though it is within a 30% affordable housing area. A viability appraisal has been submitted, which demonstrates that it would not be viable to provide affordable housing on the site. This has been looked at by an independent appraisal, and it's been agreed that that is the case, that it wouldn't be viable to provide that affordable housing. Given the type of use, in that it's a C2 use and not a C3 use, there wouldn't be any SIL payable either on the development. So turning to the planning balance, there are a number of benefits associated with the scheme. So the provision of specialist housing for older people is a clear benefit, particularly given that we don't have much provision of that within the city, and so officers do give that substantial weight. The freeing up of family homes and facilitating downsizing and bringing other housing back into the market is also given substantial weight in the balance. There are associated benefits in terms of reduced pressure on the NHS and social care attributed to the scheme, which officers give significant weight to, and there are significant economic benefits as well. However, there are a number of disbenefits, including the fact that the proposal is inappropriate development within the green belt. It will be harmful to the openness of the green belt and contrary to the purposes of including land within the green belt. The proposal is a dense form of development, and the scale will be incompatible with the surrounding area, the area of high landscape value, and the setting of the Peak District National Park. And the proposal fails to provide adequate amenity for future residents. Officers attribute all those elements substantial weight. Overall, it's considered that the benefits do not amount to very special circumstances and do not outweigh the harm, and that the scheme will cause substantial and irreversible harm. So officers recommend refusal of the scheme. And if I could just draw your attention to the supplementary report, there have been 3 additional objections, but they don't raise any new issues, but they are summarised within that supplementary for information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. We have 5 speakers on this, 2 for the application and 3 against. So I'll ask David Barnsley, please, if we approach the desk. You have 5 minutes, David.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Chair, committee members, thanks for allowing me to speak at this meeting. I speak on behalf of the Dore Village Society, which is a local forum recognised by Sheffield City Council. It's a registered charity with some 1,350 members, all inhabitants of Dore. It's an important element of life in Dore that provides much of the glue that brings the population together as a community. We object very strongly to this application. It's a site within part of Sheffield's green belt and designated area of high landscape value that forms a buffer between the developed area of Sheffield and the Peak District National Park. It's within the setting of the park, the boundary being 600 metres southwest. A recognised heritage asset, Dore Moor House Historic Park and Garden, is close to the southern border. The application for some 125 dwellings and community facilities, up to 4 stories high, is on a site, the majority of which is open grassland, typical of the surrounding area, with the balance occupied by single-storey buildings of a garden centre, a small wooded plantation and a pond. The vast majority, and maybe all, of the site cannot be classified as brownfield. Your officer's report refers to the adjacent neighbouring Haythornthwaite Wood, a memorial to Ethel Haythornthwaite, who played a major role in establishing Sheffield's green belt and the Peak District National Park. This important community facility is owned by Sheffield City Council and leased to the Peak District National Park. It's leased by the CPRE. There's presently a project between CPRE, Sheffield City Council and Dore Village Society, also involving local volunteers, to restore and upgrade the woodland as a place of quiet reflection. As detailed in your officers' reports, this application fails to comply with the NPPF, Sheffield's current adopted local plan, Sheffield's emerging local plan, and Dore's adopted neighbourhood plan. It's completely out of character with the general area, and the best thing I can do is to quote from the landscape and visual impact statement commissioned by the applicant, paragraph 611. The character of the application site will be altered entirely as the existing grassland and garden centre are developed into an urban area. At a site level, the magnitude of change would be high to medium adverse, and the effect is considered substantial to moderate adverse. The garden centre is a thriving business, valued by residents and part of Dore community, offering a discount to members of the Dore Garden Club. This development would spell the end of this facility. There's not much local support. Sheffield City Council received 272 objections from members of the public, the vast majority from Dore residents. In addition, there are objections from the Peak District National Park Authority, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, our local MP, local councillors, the Dore Village Society and the Dore Neighbourhood Forum. There were surprisingly 357 expressions of support. On investigation, we found nearly all of these were generated by Just Build Homes, part of Shared Voice Limited, a public relations and communications firm. Just Build Homes, funded by developers, cold calls members of the public, urging them to support planning applications on the grounds that the country needs more homes, without any consideration of the appropriateness of the planning applications. Those who agree are asked to go to the Just Build Homes website, register their details and give reasons for supporting an application. Just Build Homes then submits these objections in bulk to the local authority website. The vast majority of these applications are from people who are not Dore residents and are probably unaware of the detail of the application, or, for example, that it's in Greenbelt. We consider this subverts the planning process, and such submissions should be disregarded. The applicant's main justification for this development appears to be the need for sheltered accommodation for elderly people. Such a need does exist in Sheffield. However, this is a development for the affluent elderly and beyond the reach of many potential residents. It may well attract residents from outside Sheffield. Some 800 metres from the site is the Fairthorne Retirement Community, branded as an exclusive retirement development. Rightmove lists 3 Fairthorne properties for sale. 1 property remains unsold since August 22 and 2 since March 23. For all these reasons, we ask you to support your officer's recommendation and refuse this application. Many thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Christopher Pennell, please. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon. As one of only 2 Sheffield communities to have produced an adopted neighbourhood plan, Dore contends that the land lying between the developed edge of Dore and the National Park boundary is much more than greenbelt, which we will demonstrate in the green infrastructure strategy which we are currently preparing. We trust that this committee will share our perception of a valuable area of land in 3 different guises. First, as green belt. The applicant's site is entirely located on high-scoring greenbelt land. 60% of the site is greenfield, and much of the remainder is within the definition of horticulture, reducing what might be called brownfield to minimum. We do not question the need for retirement housing in Sheffield, but we question its proposed location in prime green belt. This would become the most intensively built housing development in Dore, with prominent tall buildings where it is most exposed to the National Park on the ridge formed by Hathersidge Road. There is little attempt to design the site and its architecture to blend with the distinctive character of the area. We entirely support the officer guidance that this development would significantly, some say outrageously, offend the MPPF characteristics of greenbelts, their openness and sense of permanence, and that there are no special circumstances existing which could justify its approval. The other considerations, which paragraph 147 of the MPPF say might be allowed to outweigh potential harm to the greenbelt, cannot conceivably include the need for a development which could be sited elsewhere within the city, but which the developer perversely chooses to site in the greenbelt. Secondly, as the setting of a national park. As well as being sited in the greenbelt, this development sits prominently within the setting of a national park. Your committee has an established statutory duty to have regard to the purposes of national parks, and given that the principal purpose is to protect the natural beauty of the park, its setting must be respected. Policy DN2 of our neighbourhood plan requires that development must respect the setting of the Peak District National Park. And even paragraph 182 of the MPPF says that any development within the setting of a national park should be sensitively located and designed to avoid adverse impacts on the park, which this development spectacularly fails to do. The National Park's own landscape strategy states that one of the park's valued characteristics is the flow of landscape character across and beyond the national park boundary, providing a continuity of landscape and valued setting for the national park. That continuity flows right up to the strong suburban edge of Dore formed by Newfield Lane. That is why the Park Authority has strongly objected to this application. Much of the national park immediately above Dore has been formally declared as within the park's natural zone, which is that part of the park which it is most important to conserve for its quality of wilderness, its lack of obvious signs of human influence, its open country character, and its high natural beauty. So right down to Newfield Lane, there are landscape characteristics echoing internal park landscapes. We have the immediate viewpoints in the park's natural zone, such as Houndkirk Moor, Blackamoor Nature Reserve, and Brown Hill, all looking down on Dore, which is reasonably well screened by trees, and a proposal to crassly site within this view and the setting of the national park an alien sore thumb compromising the visitor experience. And finally, third is itself. Our developing green infrastructure strategy takes this all into account, but also sees this borderland in a third guise, as it is itself, not a planning construct or a reflected setting, but land having a value derived from its own distinctive characteristics and its capacity to produce ecosystem services for Dore and wider Sheffield. The Council has confirmed this inherent value by describing this area as an area of high landscape value. Our strategy goes further and pins down its landscape qualities, its areas of good biodiversity value which could be enhanced, its high quality recreation and well-being opportunities, its opportunities for slowing the flow to reduce downstream flooding risks, and the special place it has in the hearts of our community. Surely this is Haythornthwaite country, in memory of the persistent genius who has thus far ensured that the land to each side of Hathersage Road, from Worlow Bridge to Dore Inn, has not been developed because we know where the city ends and the countryside begins, thanks to her gifts to us, the green belt of the National Park. Thank you.
5 minutes, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Colin Ross, or Councillor Colin Ross, or Lord Mayor. Thanks, Colin.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I thank the officers for this very comprehensive report, which gives a multitude of reasons why this planning application should be rejected out of hand. It's against planning policies both at national scale, the existing local plan and the emerging local plan, as well as the Dore neighbourhood plan. Essentially, this is a development in the green belt, and I would not want this committee to actually set a precedent where you are allowing a development within the green belt which will affect the whole of the city right round the area. I can see no reasons why the planning reasons for refusal should be overridden. There are no special circumstances that can be justified in this case. Whilst there are a number of messages of support of the planning applications, as we've heard, these were largely generated by Just Build Homes, were often uninformed about what the development was because they referred to social housing and starter homes for young people rather than retirement opportunities for rather wealthy people, because these will be very expensive and the management fees are very expensive. Even notwithstanding any of that, the development itself and the proposals are not in the least bit sympathetic to the setting within the edge of the green belt. When viewed from the existing built area, the 4- and 3-storey buildings appear like a wall blocking the view out to the Peak District. So we have got a multitude of reasons, as my two colleagues have outlined, and a multitude of reasons given by the officers in the report why this should be rejected out of hand, not just to protect this particular piece of green belt, but to protect the sanctity of the green belt going right round the edges of Sheffield. And I urge you, therefore, to follow the officer's recommendation and refuse this application.
Thank you, Colin. Our next speakers are in favour of the application, and the first one is Ellen Pierce, please. You have 5 minutes, Ellen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ellen Pierce, and I am here today on behalf of Inspire Villages. We are an operator and developer of integrated retirement communities, and we have over 1,200 residents across England. I wanted to explain why this proposal is acceptable in planning terms and provides a series of very special circumstances to justify this development. The need to provide specialist housing for older people is critical, and this is an issue felt in many local authority areas, but specifically in Sheffield, where those aged over 65 will make up 1 in 5 people by 2040, and those who will be unable to manage at least one personal care task will increase by about 30%, from approximately 27,000 in 2020 to around 35,000 in 2040. There is a very significant unmet need for this form of housing in Sheffield, and there are also limited housing options for your residents as they grow older. They can stay in their existing homes, which for some becomes increasingly harder for them to manage with risk of falls or isolation. They may have to go into a care home, which should only really be an option of last resort, or they may have to move away from their existing communities to find something suitable for their needs. There should be an alternative, and this offers that for an option. An IRC, Integrated Retirement Community, provides a combination of specialist purpose-built housing for older people, including communal and care facilities. They help older people to continue to live independently in their own homes for as long as possible, and are about prevention, reducing the need to go into care or into a hospital, reducing pressures on overstretched social care services and the NHS. Most people moving into an IRC are already local or have family or friends nearby. There is an immediate need for more than 1,400 of these homes, which was also known as extra care in Sheffield, and with an ageing population this is projected to worsen, and that's been acknowledged in the officer's report. And as the operator of each of our communities, we do not build and leave them. We commit to being part of the community for the long term. The facilities will be open to the whole community, including the gym, spa, pool and fitness studio and treatment room, also open to local health practitioners and the wider community. So if approved, this proposal will achieve the following: to help to address the city's acknowledged significant shortfall in this type of specialist housing on a site which is partly previously developed, freeing up family housing, bringing much needed family homes back into the market, reducing costs of the NHS and social care because of the support provided to future residents in the wider community, providing new facilities which will be open to the wider community to use, and creating new jobs and boosting the local economy through increased spending in nearby shops and on local services. So the application before you is for much needed specialist housing for older people, responding to an identified and urgent shortfall in Sheffield, and this in itself represents very special circumstances, as do the other benefits I have highlighted. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Philip Andrew, please. Can you press the button to the right?
Thank you. Sorry about that. Is that correct? Mr. Chairman, if you're so kind, if somebody could indicate to me when I've got 1 minute to go, so I don't take too much of your time up. I speak for nobody and represent nobody other than myself. I was born and brought up in South East Lancashire, and in my teenage years extensively visited the western side of the Peak District, from Lancashire through Cheshire to Derbyshire to Staffordshire. I worked for the Coal Board from 1966 to 1996, and in 1980 I was appointed to be Chief Accountant of South Yorkshire area, and it seemed natural to me to find a house as near to the national park as I could, and I indeed achieved that. I live on the Millhouses side of Eccleshall Woods. Indeed, from my house I can walk through the woods up onto the national park, and do so from time to time. So it is not just the users, the people that live in Dore, the principal objectors, that use the national park. There are many others of us too. I have a potential interest in moving into this site, as well as living not too far from it. To be clear, there are buses running from adjacent to this site into the Peak District, into Castleton and Buxton. And as a person with impaired vision, I use buses and trains extensively. So I brought up my two children who attended Abbeydale School, which is a local school, and despite the views of your colleagues in the education department at the time, it was a very good school, and both my children got good A-levels and have moved on to good jobs elsewhere. Though out of choice, my daughter last year has bought a flat in Sheffield. So my wife and I are very keen to stay within Sheffield and to continue to use the facilities that we have used for the last 40 plus years. We are both active members of the Sheffield Theatres and Music in the Round. Should I move to this site, I will be able to use the 81 bus to get to Hunter's Bar and walk up the hill to my GP. However, I am now getting to the age where I wish to continue to live independently, but am conscious that sometime during the next few years I will need a greater amount of care than my wife is able to give me. So, hence the attraction of this particular project. There are very few alternatives for independent living in the Sheffield area. In the last 5 years, I have made 2 serious attempts
You have
to
1 minute, Philip.
purchase nearby properties and have failed for different reasons. I wish to live in Sheffield and continue to enjoy the facilities there, and this development will allow me to do so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Philip. Do you wish to respond, Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick couple of comments to respond to. Mr. Bardsley identified that a number of the letters in support of the scheme were submitted from Just Build Homes, and that has been identified in our report. And we do acknowledge that in comparison to the objections, which are largely from the local area, the letters of support do seem to be from the wider area and don't always seem to have identified the specifics of the site. So they tend to be saying that people want there's a need for more housing in the city, and there's a need for retirement housing, but perhaps haven't identified the specific issues with this site. So we are aware of that, but we did still think it was appropriate to include them. But perhaps it's just been made aware that of the content of them, and perhaps the weight to be given to them is reduced because of the nature of them, perhaps. And then just in relation to Ellen Pearce's comments about the need, we absolutely recognise that there is a need. We agree with that, and we acknowledge that in the officer report and in my presentation. We acknowledge that there are benefits of the scheme, but we don't consider that they represent very special circumstances. We don't represent that they outweigh the harm identified in the report and in my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Would anyone like to speak? Comments? Members? Comments? Comments, yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I think it's questions first. Sorry.
Questions? Any questions? Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. Apparently there is a culvert that cuts across the site, and yet it doesn't appear on the plans. How would that affect the development itself? There's another question as well.
Thank you. Yes, there is a culvert that cuts across the site. and it's been acknowledged in the drainage strategy submitted as part of the application. The proposal is to open up a really small part of it in the northern part of the site and then to divert it through the site. So at the moment it crosses the site in sort of a diagonal direction, and it's proposed to reroute it so that it's located underneath the roads within the development and then connects to the outer perimeter of the site. Because you can't build over a culvert, so it's going to be under the roads. But yes, it has been acknowledged and identified, and that's considered to be an appropriate method of dealing with it by our drainage officers.
Thank you. Now, the second point is sort of walking around the site yesterday, it was clear that the ground around it is very, very boggy, and therefore it does actually soak up a tremendous amount of water. As soon as the development is in place, the development itself may not suffer from flooding, but that water has got to go somewhere because there will no longer be a water store. You've only got to look at the surrounding fields to realise how quickly they degenerate if they're not properly maintained, which happens about 200 metres from the site. And flooding is an issue. All the water will collect in the Sheaf Valley, in the River Sheaf, and we know that creates flooding further down. How much weighting can be put to the fact that we're going to lose the water storage facility and the likely increase in flooding coming into the city? Thank you.
Thank you. So the site is within a flood zone 1, which means that it's got a low probability of flooding. But yes, it's noted that there were some sort of fairly boggy conditions on the site. I am aware that the culvert, which passes through the site, also goes underneath the road, underneath Hazard Road, and connects further up into by the Dore Moor Inn. And I believe that there have been some issues with that culvert, and I think it's blocked at the moment. It's been diverted. Our drainage colleagues are aware of it, and there are measures in place to try and address that. So some of the bogginess could potentially be because of the culvert and the issues that are experienced with that at present, which will be rectified. However, in relation to the drainage strategy going forward, it is within flood zone 1. The drainage strategy submitted illustrates that water will be gathered on site, be attenuated in sort of underground storage tanks underneath the site, and then released at a slow rate into the existing system. So potentially it could actually improve the drainage within the site, and the measures certainly wouldn't make it worse. And if we did approve the development, obviously we would be recommending conditions to address the drainage on the site.
It wasn't the site that bothered me, it was the effects in the surrounding areas. And is there no weighting that can be put to that? And there's one more question after this.
So, like I said, it's in flood zone 1, and if the water that's landing on the site can be dealt with within the site and released into the system at a controlled rate, then it wouldn't have any impact in that regard.
Thank you. And the other thing is, because of the type of development it's proposed, it doesn't attract any SIL money. Now, I've heard the comments about the fact that there's an overabundance of certain types of sort of retirement apartments that can't be sold. If this development in the future finds that it's got issues, I'm not saying it has, and their apartments are converted to ordinary residences, then sort of will that attract SIL money in the future if there's a change of use? Thank you.
So, yeah, the accommodation is C2, which isn't SIL liable. If they wanted to change from C2 use to a C3 use, that would require planning permission, and at that point it would become SIL liable, so they would need to pay the money at that stage.
Henry?
Thank you, Chair. I think Barbara's answered or asked one of my questions already. The benefits of the development sound really good in terms of the nature of an IRC, but they don't seem to be tied to the use of this particular site in terms of the location. Has an exhaustive search of all possible sites been carried out that would mean that this is the only place in Sheffield that a development like this could be placed?
Thank you, Chair. The applicant has submitted an alternative sites appraisal as part of the assessment, and I believe they considered, I think it was 148 alternative sites, and disregarded the majority of them for various reasons. For example, they weren't available or they weren't big enough. Quite a comprehensive search has been done, which left them with 7 possible sites, which they sort of delved into in a little bit more depth. And again, discounted those for various reasons. So some of the reasons I think related to, for example, that they were allocated as housing sites, C3 housing sites. And so in the applicant's opinion, the land values associated with those sites would be much higher, and they would be effectively priced out. So yes, an alternative site assessment has been carried out and sites have been discounted. There is potential that, full details of all the sites that have been discounted haven't been given. And there is, I suppose, the potential that an alternative model could be proposed that is perhaps an alternative business model, which would mean that that could be accommodated elsewhere on the site. Elsewhere in the local area, not the site.
Thanks, Sherry. You mentioned the high land values as a barrier. If the site we're looking at now was C3 development, it would be incredibly high value with its proximity to the national park, being so close as to practically be in it. Would it be possible at all to guarantee by condition or covenant that should this development go ahead, it would stay as an integrated retirement community and couldn't be converted to, say, a gated community?
So if we granted planning permission for it, it would be as a C2 use, and planning permission would be required for to convert it to a C3 use, which I think is what you're asking the question about. We couldn't prevent them from submitting an application. If they wanted to submit an application at a later date, they could do that, so we wouldn't have any control over that.
Roger?
Thank you, Chair. In considering the policy or the mandatory requirement of a 10% biodiversity net gain, how would they propose to have a 10% extra net gain? Also, in measuring that net gain, what consideration would you take into account the fact that the garden centre already produced, because there's a nursery as well and it's got a pond, how would you actually measure that? Or would it be included in a measurement, should I say? Thank you.
So the existing calculation, I don't believe it includes sort of the potted plants that are within the garden centre. So it doesn't include them as part of the kind of calculation in the biodiversity on site at present. In terms of the net gain on site, when the application was originally submitted, the BNG information demonstrated that there would be a net loss on site, and I think it was in the region of a 17% net loss. And that was amended during the scope of the application through some what appeared to be relatively minor tweaks to the layout, including some additional trees, and those trees were proposed to be more mature trees, and the inclusion of some small ponds around the perimeter of the sites. And then that information was submitted, and that demonstrated that there would be, I think it was a 19% net gain. So obviously that's quite a leap from a 17% loss to a 19% gain. That information was submitted relatively late in the process, and because we were minded to, the principle of the development was considered to be unacceptable, we didn't go back and interrogate that information in more detail. If we were minded to approve the application, we would be asking questions about how that net gain was proposed, because there were some questions about it. But in theory, we could interrogate that further and try and determine how it would be achieved on site, or if it couldn't be, it would be acceptable to provide the net gain in an off-site contribution.
Do you have any more members' questions? No, I'll move to members' comment. Peter.
Thanks, Chair. We keep hearing rumours from national level about the desire to ease planning laws and restrictions, and they mention green belts from time to time, and it just worries me. And I've got a feeling that this may be the first of many planning applications to build in the Peak District National Park, which worries me. It's obviously, as last speaker said, last opposition supporter said, it's a very desirable place to live. it's also a very desirable place for the people of Sheffield and Manchester and other cities to be able to get into the open air and enjoy that countryside. And I think Sheffield, many people, or most of Sheffield, are very proud of the fact that 1/3 of the city is green belt, and all these years we have fought hard to protect it. And we've got the planning guidelines and laws to make sure we do protect it. And in this planning application, Chair, I see no reason at all to divert from the advice we've been given. I think it's something we should treasure with all our might, really, for our kids and our grandkids. And to start building developments now, I think would be a big mistake. And I support the officer recommendation fully, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. Laura?
There is a need for this type of accommodation. I'm getting to the age where I'm probably thinking about it myself, but yes, there is a need for it. I accept that fully, but I'm also concerned that any retirement community, the accommodation should be affordable as well, because the majority of Sheffield people may find cost a key issue. There are economic benefits which we must give weight to as well. There's jobs, there's potential gain in the local community and shops. But like Peter, I think that we have to protect our green belt. I think it's sacrosanct. We lose that, we lose part of the soul of this city. And anything that encroaches into that, I think, is setting a dangerous precedent. So echo everything Peter says, and I wouldn't like to see this development in the green belt. There is a need, but it needs to be somewhere outside the green belt. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Glynis next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have fortunately visited other sites for people to retire to, and they've been built within the city and perhaps on a brownfield site, not a greenfield site. And when I visited there, luckily speaking to lots of people that were moving into a new development, none of them were from Sheffield. They'd all come from out of Sheffield. So I don't think this sort of development would provide many places for people of Sheffield. All those people were moving in, buying, and moving in to be near their children who'd come to our universities and then stayed in Sheffield. They were relocating from Norwich, from down south, from Bournemouth, Cornwall, all over the country, coming to live in Sheffield, which is good. It's a nice city to live in, but I don't think this sort of development would provide homes for Sheffield people.
Thanks, Glynis. Barbara next.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there are three real issues for me. It's a self-contained community, which is isolated. So I know there was talk about it being integrated into the existing settlement, but I don't see how it can be. And I think the principle is wrong because it's so far away from most of the settlement developments. I'm also concerned about sort of if this goes ahead, it will actually impact on the surrounding green belt. Now, one of the points made was it's not a degraded site, but with it being there, it will degrade what's around it, and that therefore to me worries me that sort of it will actually sort of erode the protection for the surrounding land as well because a precedence has been set. And the third thing is a massive structure that's being proposed, and we've been told it's needed to make it viable. So therefore, if it needs to be that big and that sort of intrusive, then I just don't think it's in the right place. So I'd go with the officer recommendation.
Thanks, Barbara. Roger?
Right, batting further down the order, a lot of what I would have said has already been said. But I must say that this low-lying development that already exists there does bring in economic benefits, and people will come and spend their money in that particular area. But it's not obtrusive, and I think it shows. I can't see how we get this 19% up plus net gain. Certainly, it's not. I mean, we've heard, but we haven't seen. And it really needs to be demonstrated quite categorically. There are places not far away from here, from this particular place, in mill houses, because that is where I represent, and I know that there are spaces in some of the older people's houses. I say older because I think I'm now in my 70s, so I qualify for these places, but we always think that older people are 10 years older than what we are. So there are spaces available still in those areas, and some of those dwellings have been, they are luxury dwellings as well, but they've been very difficult to sell in many cases. I've got two that people have notified me of and want me to help them, and I can't do that, of course. I know it's not a planning consideration in this particular case, but the overwhelming argument is about the protection of the green belt. And while I think some of what we've seen in the plans are excellent, they are the right things perhaps, but in the wrong area. Thank you.
Ivy?
Chair, we have an aging population. Thus, we need more retirement homes and more older adult-friendly accommodation in Sheffield. However, this site falls under the Greenbelt and is on the border of the National Park. I agree with our officers that this proposal would be an inappropriate development which will harm the openness of the Greenbelt. Therefore, I won't be supporting this application. Thank you.
Any further questions? Henry?
Thank you, Chair. Edge of the Peak District is clearly an idyllic place to want to live, but it's because of its protected amenity value that it's so desirable, and any development that was to the detriment of that amenity value would end up eating its own tail and destroying the thing that we love in the first place. I feel that developing it on the Greenbelt in general, especially this part of the Greenbelt, is to put 2 feet on a rather slippery slope. And the fact that it's bang opposite Highfield Thwaite Woods would make the loss not only real but very symbolic as well to the movement to protect the green belt. I do agree that we do need this sort of development. I just don't think we want it on this site, and I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thanks, Henry. Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with much of what has been said. I mean, I think it'd be a horrible blot on the landscape if this goes ahead. I agree there's a need for this sort of development. This isn't the place for it. I can see the attractiveness of this integrated development, and you know there must be locations where this sort of thing will work, but it would look horrible where it's proposed. We can't allow it to go ahead.
Thanks, Cliff. Any further questions? We'll move to a vote then. Peter?
Support the officer's recommendation, please, to reject.
Support officer's recommendations.
Support refusal.
Abstain, Chair.
Support the officer's recommendations.
Support the officer's recommendations.
Again, support the officer's recommendations.
Support officer recommendation.
Support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. That application is lost. Thank you. We now move to item 7C. Planning application number 23/03216/FUL, the Coach House, 306 Dobbin Hill, Sheffield, S117JG. Chris?
Thank you,
Chair, could I just ask that we wait for Councillor Chaplin to re-enter?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Supposed to be a speaker for this one, but he's not here. Unless he's changed. Yeah. unless he's come in.
Jordan said he was here.
Yeah. Unless his appearance has changed considerably since I last saw him.
Actually, Shelby and I aren't known.
Yeah.
Right, we're up for it now, Chris.
Is he sat down here?
Oh, it's you, please, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. If is Jay there? Oh, is there? Yeah. So again, members have got the information in front of them, but just flicking through the slides there. So on the first page, slide 57, identifies the site, which you can see is a very narrow strip of what is currently effectively grass verge at the very top of Dobbin Hill at its junction with Ringing Low Road. You'll see if we then move to slide 60, you'll see that has some street furniture at the junction end of it, form of litter bin, street name sign and lamp column. But then otherwise is an open grass verge with a dwarf stone wall for the most part of it, but that increases in height towards the house, which is the building which juts out towards the footpath edge. Sorry, Chair. And then there are further images, and as you can see, as you get closer to the building, the wall increases in height quite considerably, up to in the order of 2 metres. The measurements are given in the report. Apologies, Chair, I've not got that on the tip of my tongue. And so there are quite a number of images here showing the house and the relationship of the wall to the grass verge. If you turn to slide 63, the other side of that wall, the wall with the ivy growing up it, is the applicant's garden. So the applicant's property is the property on the right-hand side there. And on the other side of the wall is the applicant's garden. And what they're seeking to do with this application is to extend that garden towards the road and towards the edge of the verge and bring the stone wall to the edge of to the footpath edge, save for 150, 200 millimetres setback. And the slides, some of these now have a description and they confirm what I've just been saying. That grass strip is highway, and so it's actually changing the use of the land from highway to residential curtilage. Within the grass verge, if this proposal were to be accepted, would be 3 different treatments. So for the extent of the verge alongside the taller stone wall, that would be enclosed with a stone wall of very similar detail. Then an equivalent amount moving towards the junction would be enclosed with a lightweight estate fence with 3 trees planted within the grass verge, and the level would remain at footpath level at that point. And then beyond that, the last portion would remain as open grass verge and highway with street furniture within it. And you can see that on slide 70. There are 2 images there. The proposals are the left-hand side, and the existing is the right-hand side. So this, I think, is at the end of the. Sorry, there is a quite helpful elevational drawing on slide 71 as well. They look very similar, but the key difference is on the left-hand side, where you can see the garden being extended towards the edge of the footway. So the report identifies that there have been a number of objections to the proposal on several bases, including the loss of the amenity of the grass verge and the visual impact of that. In the comments, there is also some slight confusion around whether, in fact, the building is a listed building or not, and we can confirm it isn't. Chestnut Cottage, which is to the north west, if I've got my orientation properly, yes, is listed, as is the adjacent cottage, which fronts onto Falkland Road, which is the next road along. This property isn't listed, but it is seen in conjunction with it, particularly from stood adjacent to the grass verge, looking back towards those properties. There's reference to the loss of open space within some of the representations, but in our view, this wouldn't constitute open space that would be protected by the MPPF, in that it doesn't meet both criteria of having visual amenity benefit and being of beneficial recreational value, because the recreational value associated with it is so limited. And I think that the report sets that out in some detail. Overall, Chair, we're recommending approval for it because after negotiations with the applicant, we feel that the visual impact has been reduced by containing the garden extension to the areas within the stone wall, such that it reads as part of that historic fabric. And we have a level of confidence and conditions to ensure that the details would be carried out satisfactorily. And then the landscaping portion of it allows views of the listed buildings to be enjoyed as well, still without a large wall obscuring that view. There is a supplementary report which I need to draw members' attention to. And I'll need to read a fair bit of this out, Chair, because it is quite lengthy. Since the agenda had been published, we received a further objection from the Millhouses, Ecclesall and Carternal Community Group. It does raise a number of similar issues to those that have already been raised within the report, but talks about the visual impact not just being the physical features, but the experience that people have walking alongside what was what is a pleasant grass verge. They're concerned that that officers and members don't pay too much attention to the CGI image that we've shown here, because they feel that's misleading. They feel that stopping up the highway, which I'll come on to later, impinges on public freedom, and that the officer's report makes no attempt to assess the impact of granting permission on the precedent value for hundreds and thousands of such pieces of land in similar situations. And they also request that members visit the site. In response to that, the majority of those points were made in the original objections and have been responded to within the officer's report. On the CGI image, we use those as a guide to indicate what something might look like, but we don't use it for assessment, and we don't use it as an approved plan as such. And in terms of precedent, each application must be considered on its individual merits and against relevant policy, and one decision doesn't therefore create a precedent for another. We are recommending a report amendment in terms of the highway closure. So I won't read all this out because some of it is quite wordy, but the report identifies at page 107 that the implementation of the proposals would necessitate a highway closure, and there is in fact a plan within the report on page 108 the plan is, which indicates the extent of highway closure that would follow potentially from this decision. And it requests that the report requests that members confirm there is no objections to that. However, closures under section 247 of the Town and Country Planning Act fall under the remit of the Head of Strategic Transport, Sustainability and Infrastructure. So accordingly, the section of the report that's set out below, we're now recommending is deleted, Chair, or should be deleted from the report. And that should be replaced with the following phrase, which is, if this application is approved, it would then require separate decisions regarding the Section 247 closure process and whether to sell any council-owned land to the applicant to be made in accordance with ordinary council processes. So that means, Chair, that the recommendation that's being considered today is simply whether to grant planning permission or not. Thank you.
We have a speaker 4, Guy Rustling, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Guy Rustling, and thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I won't take long. I am the applicant, and I will be living in the property number 306 at Dobbin Hill once I've completed the restoration and extension of the building. Just for clarification and avoidance of doubt, my home is not listed, nor does it fall within the conservation area. All the work today has been carried out in accordance with the approved scheme, which was granted planning permission for, following thorough review, consultation and help from the council's planning and conservation officers. This application has been made in the attempt to afford me some privacy and to improve my garden amenity. Should members agree with the planning officer's comprehensive report, it will also take out the public liability for a verge which is no longer required for public use. It will also improve the space for public amenity by preventing it from being used for random vehicle parking, and the addition of 3 mature and vibrant trees along with ground planting that will improve the area for all to enjoy. So a saving for the city, an improvement for both my neighbours and myself, with absolutely no impact whatsoever on highway safety. Thank you.
Members' questions? Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. I know that it's only representative, but on page 69, it shows an addition of trees right outside the proposed development. And I'm just wondering, I can't see any reference to those trees being planted. Is the landscaping purely for the fenced off area that we can see in 69? 3 trees in the fenced off area. If you look to where the lady's standing, it shows trees behind her and to the left of her, and those trees don't exist. So is there are there proposals as part of the landscaping to introduce those trees or not?
Thank you, Chair. That's one of the reasons why we don't pay too much attention to the CGI's, Chair. No, that land that you're referring to would be outside the application site boundary. The only element of that I would say is indicative of what would occur as a result of the application are the 3 trees within the fenced area, because that's all that is being proposed.
Thank you. And the other thing is again, I couldn't work out from the description as to whether the whole of the wall, including the lower section, was to be retained and reused, or whether only just that it was all to come down and then rebuilt. And if it's being rebuilt, is it going to be in the natural stone that exists at the moment, or something similar?
Chair, the lower wall would remain. Obviously there will be some interaction with it that would result in some of it needing to be rebuilt, and the new wall would be a combination of reclaimed stone from the original wall and new stone to match, and there is a condition requiring details of that.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else? Cliff?
Hi, Chris. I'll ask the question here formally that I asked yesterday. There were some objections raised with regard to visibility at the junction arising from this work. Am I right in assuming that there will be no adverse effect on visibility?
That is our view, Chair, but I don't know if Helen wants to add any more to that.
No, well, not really, Chair, other than to say, no, we don't believe that there'll be any adverse impact in any highway safety form at the junction or along the road as a result of this.
Henry?
Thank you, Chair. My first one was about the council buying that land in the first place in relation to improvements for the road junction, but I do believe you just answered that. The second one, there's been an objection based on the fact that the notifications weren't sent out properly, as much as this is a technical problem. Is that correct?
Chair, we always check that the notifications have been, occasionally we get information from members of the public that they haven't been received or whatever, and we always check that and make sure that the right people, when I say right people, in accordance with our code of practice for publicity, have been notified, and so that process has been rechecked, and we're happy that it's met that requirement, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think if I've understood right from the presentation that many years ago there was a wall that ran parallel to the pavement, and that was demolished and then rebuilt and set back, at which point the council then had ownership and responsibility for the land. I'm looking at the metal fencing around, which would protect the three trees, but want to understand who would be responsible for any litter or detritus that fell in or was dropped in or the wind blew into that area. Would that be the responsibility of the applicant who wants to purchase the land, or does that fall to someone else?
Chair, within the fenced area, it would be the applicant.
Thank you.
Do we have any comments?
I would like to put forward a proposal because it has created some fuss within the area, and I'll try to mitigate any problems that might arise. Could we suspend this until and that the sale of this piece of land by the council be agreed by the correct committee, and then that would solve any problem about the sale of the land, and I think it might help people that are opposed to this plan, as well as the person that wishes to go ahead with it.
Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. This is a comment. I mean, sort of, basically, sort of, it was clarified yesterday that we couldn't suggest that sort of only half that strip was appropriate to be incorporated into the garden. It was either all or nothing. And while I can understand the homeowner wanting to extend his existing garden wall, which would only cover sort of part of that strip, and I'd accept that, I cannot understand why it is felt necessary to buy the other half of it, which the community have got designs on. There are all sorts of sort of ways that they can manage that to improve its appearance. Now, I just think it's disproportionate to advantage one person and disadvantage quite a few others who also would like to invest in that particular part of the verge in the future. And also sort of, even if we recommend planning, I mean, I'm assuming, but this might be wrong, that the land would have to be put out for tender whether we put planning or not if it's being disposed of. And so because we can't do it piecemeal, I cannot support the recommendation. I just think it's disproportionate effect on the community.
Any other comments? Peter?
Chair, on balance, I support the planning application, Chair. It's an environmental thing, and I just think it'll look better when it's done, to be honest with you. I think I think it's far more likely that the resident is able to maintain it and keep it tidy, and it's not a big issue, I don't think, and I just cannot see it being viable for a community use, really. It's not quite wide enough. So I'm going to support the planning recommendation, Chair.
Barbara?
Can I just clarify, sort of, that there are policies going through the council whereby a small community can maintain verges, and we've seen that happening all the way around. And it's, you know, there are plans in place. So that in itself, I wouldn't agree with you, Peter, because it's possible to do it. I agree the site at the moment is a mess, and I agree I can understand why the owner wants to incorporate the lower section, but it's the whole length that I have an issue with. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Anyone else? Mike?
I can see that if if you go, say, to Grenoside, to Main Street, you can see a lot of homes set back, and you can see a lot of grass verge between the pavement and the homes, and a lot of those houses have got planting in front of them in the way of daffodils and crocuses and snowdrops at this time of year. But this is a piece of land which where the wall has already moved once some decades ago, and now there's a proposal to move it back. So I can't really see that there's any heritage value to the land in that way. The proposal gives the owner of the home next to it a bit more privacy. I can understand that. I agree with Peter that the trees, if we get the right kind of trees and then they're native, then native species to the UK, that would be a good way forward. And it would still leave some land available for residents to either bring their dogs or plant some native wild flowers. I'm just a bit surprised that there hasn't been more demand for that at an earlier stage. They could have been planting there. But I appreciate that Barbara probably knows more about this than I do. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? No, we'll move to the vote then.
Thank you, Chair. I find this quite difficult, actually. I mean, I think from the point of view of residents that live opposite this, it's not going to be pleasant to see this bit of grassland, bit of grass. It's only a narrow patch, I know, taken away, and that tall brick wall being brought forward. I'm very torn on this, and I don't know how I'm going to vote, but it's difficult.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the matter that members are saying they do find it difficult, just a reminder that should the vote be lost, we will then have a discussion about planning reasons for refusal. So it may be useful to think what those are. Thank you.
Barbara?
Thank you. Can I check, sort of, as I say, I think it sort of disproportionately weighs in favour of one person to the disadvantage of the others. Is that something that can be sort of elaborated on in planning terms? You know, it's the...
Thank you, Chair. What the Planning Authority is doing here is determining whether this is a reasonable use of the land. So it's a different matter to my mind as to whether the council as highway authority or the council as potentially the owner of the land, should the highway be closed, should sell it. So to my mind, it's a different decision. It's whether this is a reasonable use of the land that we're being asked to determine today. Thank you.
Can we move to the vote then, please?
Support recommendation, Chair.
Support recommendation, Chair.
For the recommendation.
Support the recommendation.
Do not support the recommendation. Would you like me to elaborate right now, or only in the event that it's lost?
Yeah, we'll have a discussion if the vote's lost. That's okay, thank you.
Abstain.
Against the recommendation.
Against the recommendation.
Abstain.
Chair, I believe the position, if my Democratic Services colleagues agree with me, is that you've got 4 votes for and 3 against. Therefore, there is the option for yourself to vote and cast. Thank you.
I will vote for. That's now passed, thanks. The next item on the agenda is item 7D, planning application number 22-0/00877/FUL, land between 5 and 21 Holmhirst Road, Sheffield. Is that you, Chris?
Please, Chair. Thank you, Chair. The site is, as indicated on the map on page 74 of the presentation and also on the screen. It's an irregular shaped site in the centre of Woodseats, very close to Chesterfield Road. It's accessed from Holmhirst Road, which is the road to the north east, and is surrounded on all but the Holmhirst Road frontage by traditional residential properties on Holmhirst Road, Linburn Road and Osmaston Road. There are also a couple of new build properties towards the end of Osmaston Road, which is an unadopted public highway, and the medical centre, Woodseats Medical Centre and Library, is right at the kind of southern tip of the site. The site is, as you will see from the image, the aerial image, green in character, though the majority of the most dominant elements of vegetation are all around the edges, with the centre somewhat bare. And the centre of the site has in fact seen quite a bit of activity in recent years, because there was a previous planning permission for this site granted approximately 10 years ago for a very similar development to that which is now before you. And as part of preparations for implementing that permission, the owner, who is still the applicant now, carried out Japanese knotweed eradication. So that a lot of the site is disturbed and has been worked, if you like, in the centre of the site. So the tree cover is around the edge. The images that you have in your pack include on page 76 Osmaston Road with the Woodseats Medical Centre, the large building to the right there. the images on page 77 are glimpses through the new properties from Osmaston Road to the site. So you can see beyond the fencing it's very open, and it's actually set at a lower level than the surrounding areas. Page 78 are again the more modern properties, and the site can be seen beyond those timber fences. And in fact, you can see the properties on Holmhirst Road in the distance there. Then on page 79 is Holmhirst Road. The Holmhirst Road frontage is a very unattractive concrete panel fence with Harris fencing filling the gaps in between along the Holmhirst Road frontage. And you can see the Woodseats Medical Centre again in the distance there. As you can see, the site is quite bare, save for the trees around the edges. And then the images on pages 80 and 81 show something of the current condition of the land and the aforementioned concrete panel fence. When we get to the site layout image on slide 85, you can see that it's quite a busy drawing, that, I'm afraid, but you can see the access on the right hand side on the Holmhirst Road frontage taken in. That's actually in between highway trees. There are no highway trees affected. You may have seen some of those on the previous image. And car parking is then to the south of the site, including, you can see there, including where it crosses, you can see a culverted watercourse, which is that straight, thick, shaded line. The building itself is 3 stories high and sits in the middle of the site and provides 14 two-bedroom apartments with car parking. There are 17 spaces and 8 of those are electric vehicle charging points, and there are areas of bike storage and bin storage within the site as well. The images, or the image, sorry, on page 86 gives an impression of the overall scale of the building when viewed from Holmhirst Road. And you should note there that the building is set further back into the site to some degree as well. So we're confident that there are no issues with anything being out of scale or character there, and it's a building of appropriate form for its location. You have layouts of each floor on page 87. So there are balconies for a number of the units on the upper floors, and then elevation drawings on 88 and 89. With some cross sections then on pages 90 and 91 that show the relationship with neighbouring properties. The development is in a housing area, so it's a preferred use. It's in a very sustainable location with easy access to lots of services within the Woodseats Centre, and also in very close proximity to Graves Park, which is an important consideration because whilst there are some small pockets of amenity space within the site, because of the constraints of the site, it's difficult to provide large areas of that without lots of tree removals, and we felt the balance was right to retain the trees with Grave Park being so close. The accommodation is all of a good quality. Some of the key issues that have been raised, there have been a number of objections raised across the range of general planning considerations, really, about sort of scale, design, some concerns about loss of privacy, but each boundary to the site is sufficient distance from the dwelling, from the apartment block, for that not to present a problem or breach any of our guidelines. One of the issues has been around ecology, there was an ecology survey undertaken and no protected species were found on the site and no particularly important habitats. There was ahead of it being mandatory, there was a biodiversity net gain biodiversity assessment undertaken, and the development would result in a loss. So, as you can see, with limited opportunity to improve that on site to the extent that's required, you'll see on page 139 that the applicants already entered into a legal agreement to provide a financial contribution to provide biodiversity enhancements elsewhere in the locality. That's been completed. So if permission was to be, if the recommendation was to be endorsed today, then permission would be granted, subject to that legal agreement. There are no significant highway safety concerns. The site's in flood zone 1, which means it's at low risk of flooding, but there is known local flooding within the site and localised flooding within the site. And given that it's set below the level of the surrounding areas, there is a risk that there will be some potential for flooding within the lower floor of the building. And so, as you can see on page 141, 140, 141 and 142, what's set out there is the requirement for, let me get the phrasing right here, passive flood protection measures and a place of safety within the building. So examples of passive measures include raising finished floor levels or installing flood-proof doors and windows which are then kept closed or normally closed. And that's what is being proposed here, Chair, with refuge within the building at higher level, which is an acceptable solution. There were some drainage proposals put forward which will be incorporated into a condition, and it will include such features. So, Chair, our recommendation is to approve the application subject to the legal agreement that's been signed. There is a couple of points that I need to mention on the supplementary report, which is item 2. Simply that one of the conditions is it doesn't change, it's just in the wrong place in the order, Chair. It's not a true pre-commencement condition, and it should move to the pre-occupancy category. So that will result in some reordering and renumbering of the conditions. And also in terms of the report update, we refer in the report to not achieving a 4-year housing supply, quoting that as being 2.86 years, when in fact it should now read 3.01 years. Otherwise, the recommendation remains, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. We have no speakers on this. Members' questions? Henry?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, thank you for the report. On the site visit yesterday, some of the trees that are on the border of the site within the curtilage looked fairly choked with ivy. I understand the plan is for them all to be retained. Is it possible that during development, if those posed a risk to the building, they would be removed?
If they posed a risk to the building, then it's quite possible that they could be removed, yes.
In that case, would it be reasonable to condition that any of those trees that were removed during the development would be reinstated?
Potentially, Chair. Can I just check the conditions for a moment, please? Just to make sure that that's not already covered in the landscape and ecological management plan, which it could well be. So condition 9 states that requires tree protection during construction, those being retained. which doesn't cover the point being made. There is a requirement for a landscape scheme to be submitted, which doesn't necessarily cover the but doesn't necessarily cover the point that's been made. So yeah, we do have I'm just getting to the end of it and just making sure that we haven't got it covered. We do have a relatively straightforward standard condition which requires that all trees other than those indicated for removal should be retained, and if any are lost, that they're required to then be replaced, which I think would answer Councillor Nottage's point, and I would be happy to incorporate that, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. Again, it's to do with flooding. So on page 141, 143, it mentions culverts and regular blockages, which would potentially cause flooding on the site. Now, obviously, sort of there's going to be a drainage planning conditions for the site itself, but who's responsible for unblocking culverts or keeping them clear above the site, which is obviously going to cause a problem here? Because it seems a bit unfair on developers to constantly have to deal with problems caused elsewhere.
I believe it's the Lead Local Flood Authority, which is part of the council. That's my understanding.
Can't they be forced to actually keep the culverts clear across the city? Is there issues that we're not aware of that would actually cause problems, which again would affect developments like this? Manpower, lack of resources, don't know.
No more questions? Comments?
Chair, can I just confirm that I believe Councillor Nottage's comments did suggest an additional condition, but that hasn't been proposed, seconded and voted on. So if that does want to go ahead, that is something that members need to deal with. Thank you.
Can you propose it, please? Mary?
Thank you, Victoria. If Chris thinks that condition is reasonable, I would like to propose that as an additional, assuming there's a second in the room.
Yeah, I'll second.
Can we take a vote on that? Show of hands, please. Yeah, that's passed. Thank you. Members' comments. Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a bit of waste space really at the moment. It's a bit of an eyesore in many ways, and I suppose it could be developed in other ways. It could be a nice little pocket park or that, but that's not what's on the table today. And I think I think to build there according to what's been described, I think would be a useful use of the space. So I'll be voting for.
Thanks, Cliff. Roger?
Thank you very much. One of the interesting things about the neighbours is that they want something doing. And that's always a very positive point, particularly as traffic in that area is quite, and parking is quite a problem. But that seems to have been, considered and sorted, I think, in this particular project, and well, particularly the on-site parking. And it's, I think it would be an improvement to the land, and I think, as long as we do get that enhancement, which will be forthcoming, then I can't see a problem. So I'm in favour of it.
Peter, then Mike.
Just to concur, I mean, they've had 3 applications agreed to build there and not fulfilled any of them. So I can't see any planning grounds for turning this one down. But so I hope it does get built. So I support it, Chair.
Yes, Chair, I'm going to support the recommendation. I would like to see Swift bricks and and possibly some bird and bat boxes considered as part of the contribution towards biodiversity net gain. I do think it's unfortunate that there are small to medium scale developers that deliberately pitch their buildings at 14 so that they can avoid making additional contributions. But be that as it may, it does have many benefits, and it certainly shouldn't upset the neighbours with regard to car parking spaces, as they will be contained within the site. Thank you.
Mike, were you proposing a condition about Swift boxes?
Chair, if I can just come in there, the condition 8, I believe it is, does require bird and bat boxes. Yeah.
That's fair.
Sorry, I missed that.
Any more? Can we go to vote, please? Peter?
4, Chairman.
4, Chair.
For the recommendation, Chair.
4, Chair.
4, Chair.
4, Chair.
4, Chair.
4, Chair.
4, Chair.
Thank you, that's carried. Item 8, agenda record of planning appeal submissions and decisions. Do we have anything to be brought to members' attention? No, thank you. Date of next meeting.
On page 147, on Knoll Lane rather, there was a refusal of planning permission for the erection of 3 dwelling houses. Is there any reason why that didn't come to planning? Thank you.
I don't have that information available, but I would assume because there weren't sufficient representations in order for us to. Is that right? Sorry, I'm handing over to Chris, please.
That's kind of correct. Because I think the issue. I'm just looking for the right one. You mean the one at the top of page 147? Yeah. If I remember correctly, there were a number of objections, but it was a recommendation for refusal in line with those objections and with council policy. So in terms of the delegation criteria, we determined those under delegated powers. So in other words, the body of representation didn't conflict with our recommendation, and our recommendation followed policy as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Yes, Chair. It's in relation to page 154. It's where the applicant wanted to build a slightly smaller scale tower block from 38 stories, reducing the number there. And I noticed the inspector refers to the Armstrong judgment and what they call the Finney case. And I just wondered if our officers had known about those at all. We might not have tried to proceed to appeal on it, or perhaps the officers can enlighten us. It's just the expense of having to go to an appeal which you're going to lose unless officers didn't know about those cases.
Thank you, Chair. We did know about those cases. I think, well, as it explained there, but the area of dispute was whether the Section 73 application process was the right process in this case to seek an amendment. with particular regard to the definition or the description of the development in this case. We did actually take legal advice before making the decision to...
So the legal advice was that you were on pretty strong ground, and
I
the
think
inspector disagreed.
The inspector allowed the appeal because they thought there was something to discuss. You know, I think they thought there was a point, you know, that was worth considering. So I think it was a valid appeal. Thanks.
That's definitely it. Right. The next committee meeting is Tuesday, the 2nd of April, 2024, 2 p.m. Thank you, members.